Whenever it tells me the Hangout on Air is live, good evening and welcome in live from Indianapolis. You can tell by my hotel room. Don't think I'd have anything dirty in the background. Steve Salami, Sigmund Bloom, maybe joined by Matt Waldman a little bit later tonight as well. Dr. Gene Bramall is on assignment. But Bloom, after 2 months off on our live show on Thursday nights, we are back.
Yeah, we're back, and the NFL has never gone away, really. We had an immensely entertaining Super Bowl, one that I think the bottom line for fans when Doug Peterson wins and says you go 8-8 when you're conservative, you win the Super Bowl when you're aggressive. We all want more aggressive football. That's something I think that will benefit us all to watch teams and coaches being more aggressive. Lots of offseason moves already, but some of the biggest ones yet to come, Kirk Cousins, among others. We have a quarterback offseason like one we haven't seen in a long time as far as some musical chairs, not to mention these draft quarterbacks, the draft, free agency, Jarvis Landry trade. Is the Honey Badger going to be in Arizona? I mean, all these questions are almost unthinkable 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago are not just thinkable, but we're thinking about them and talking about them.
Yeah, we're thinking about it, talking about it, and everything right here on this show. Marshawn Lynch may not be with the Raiders. Michael Crabtree may not be with the Raiders. The Landry thing, like you were saying. So many things going on in so many different directions. But I'm here in Indy at the scouting combine where Saquon Barkley is putting on a hell of a show. First and foremost, Bloom, I was talking to an NFL scout tonight that said Barkley is the best prospect that he scouted in a decade, any position. Doesn't matter. Better than Andrew Luck, better than Myles Garrett, everything that we've seen over the last decade, the best player to ever be scouted by this NFC scout is actually Saquon Barkley. So fantasy owners licking their chops, having a couple of pops with Frank Schwab, our man from Yahoo Sports a little bit earlier tonight. He's got the number one pick in his dynasty league, and guess who he's taking? Saquon Barkley. So, well, and I feel the Browns at 1. Let's just put this out there. The Browns at 1, why? If they're not in love with any quarterback, we've heard Darnold may be their favorite, but if you're sitting there at 1 and 4, if you're the Browns, get Barkley, and then at 4, worst case scenario, what are you going to get? Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, what have you? So with this group of 5 first-round quarterbacks, which, yes, includes Lamar Jackson, we're going to get to that a little bit later, but Saquon Barkley, number 1 in the Browns' heart, Bloom, and number 1 in fantasy owners' hearts as well.
Yes, and I think what we're going to see, best ball leagues, in some sites, I think FFPC already going. I know MFL 10's moving over to Fanball. Those will be fired up soon. You're going to have to take Barkley in the first round, I believe. We saw Ezekiel Elliott, the last great running back. You were able to get him in the early third or maybe late seconds if you were reaching for him. Barkley's going to go in the first, as he should. And I'm not going to say it's hyperbole to say that he's the best overall prospect that's been evaluated, because physically he is a marvel. Physically, I guess we didn't get to see Todd Gurley tested healthy, but I don't think it's crazy when we see the dust settle that he's a Bo Jackson level kind of athlete when you watch him and you see his traits isolated on individual plays. However, I do think that, and this was a problem with David Johnson, I do want to see Barkley put his head down and run guys over, or when it's called for. I want to see him win collisions. I want to see him dictate confrontations to inferior physical players that he doesn't always do. That being said, Barkley's one of those classic picks that you're not going to get fired for taking Barkley. What did John Dorsey say today? He's like, Gale Sayers went in the number 4 pick, and he said number 4, not number 1. But still, and that's not. And look, if Barkley does develop a mean streak, then you're looking at truly a potentially generational player, because pass blocking is there. Refinement as a receiver is there. Not just an excellent receiving running back, but one that you can do a lot of these mismatch, move them around the formation, split them out wide, have them run routes. That it's all there. It's all there. But Cleveland, and then we talk about how there's the draft, and there's the excitement of the draft and how high do these players go. But then there's also the excitement of the draft of how their destiny, their fate changes based on where they land. And can Saquon Barkley be the Saquon Barkley that we hope he can be in Cleveland? I don't know, maybe not as long as Hugh Jackson is there. Indy is becoming more interesting with Frank Reich and the people he is surrounding himself with. I think Tampa Bay is his absolute floor at number 7.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but as you said, based on what you're hearing and feeling at the combine, and also the other variable here is the quarterbacks and whether a quarterback makes themselves undeniable at number 1. And I don't think any of them have done that yet.
Saquon Barkley won't make it past 5 with Denver. Denver will take Barkley at number 5. Whether they get Case Keenum, whether they get Kirk Cousins, that's a discussion for a different time. But with Saquon Barkley, Bloom, just like with Ezekiel Elliott, if you're a crazy fantasy owner, and I know we have to talk about where he's going to go, and let's say the Browns were to get A.J. McCarron and, then go in the draft and get Barkley and then Quentin Nelson, something like that, right? And maybe Nelson doesn't make sense for them, although he makes sense for a lot of teams, maybe the second best player in this draft. But the point is upgrading that offensive line, having that superstar running back, just like with Ezekiel Elliott. If you wanted to take him at number 1, I'm not going to talk you out of it. I wouldn't take Saquon Barkley at number 1, but he's definitely in the first round conversation already. And if you want to go top 5, wherever that pick is in your draft, it's Saquon Barkley, and the talent as a runner and receiver is absolutely undeniable.
And the team taking him to make him the centerpiece of their offense. Like, you remember LaDainian Tomlinson, the year the Chargers took him.
And he held out.
Yeah, and he held out, and he was still, a 350 or 370 touch running back. And his yards per carry was low, but it showed what was to come. And that's the other thing about Barkley. But, 350 touches in the Cleveland offense versus 350 touches in the Giants offense and I don't think the Giants are going to take him. 350 touches in the Indy offense, in the Denver offense, and then I like you're hinting at, probably the Jets or Tampa are more long shots at this point. It's not all created equal, and Duke Johnson is still there in Cleveland. So I think in Dynasty, the question isn't who's the number 1 pick. He's the number 1 pick. I don't think there's a Dallas-esque situation that Darius Geis could land in that you would say, well, if Geis lands somewhere, New Orleans has been great for running backs, but they have their 2 running backs. I don't think there's that plum situation. The question is, do you try to get a king's ransom for Barkley and take advantage of that total speculative value if he lands in Cleveland because of what Cleveland does to players, or do you get out ahead of it and not wait to see him land in Cleveland because of some of the pessimism that might cause? But there will not be any pessimism about Barkley coming out of this week.
Yeah, mama, don't let your babies grow up to be running backs because, man alive, this is an incredible class. It's incredibly deep. And if you're a free agent running back, I know there was some buzz about Dion Lewis, who, listen, you've been a huge fan of Dion Lewis. Both you and I have appreciated his game since his days at Pitt. But come on now. No. We're looking at this draft class. We're going to talk about Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, right? And I think Sony Michel is LaShawn McCoy if he can hang on to the rock. His fumble rate is one of the worst in college football history. I really appreciate Sony Michel's game, but you got to hang on to that rock. Nick Chubb, same number of reps? That's right, Bloom, off the top of my head. I've been out drinking cold pops here in Indy, so forgive me if I'm a little scatterbrained, but I believe Chubb had the same number of reps on the bench press this day as Saquon Barkley did here in Indianapolis. So
29.
And Chubb and Sony Michel, both considerations in the second round. Maybe Michel goes in the first round. We'll see. But my God, Darius Geis, right? This running back class is chock full of talent. Let's talk about those Georgia backs and what you believe they can be.
Well, Chubb, this is another one of those players where we ask ourselves, and the combine is big for this, how much of his pre-injury athleticism can he get back? And Matt Waldman, if he was here, motorboat. Yeah, Matt Waldman would be ready to motorboat once we talk about Nick Chubb. And Nick Chubb pre-injury is the closest back in this class to Saquon Barkley. And depending on what you're looking for, if you're a Jags philosophy, maybe you like Chubb's better than Maybe you like Chubb better than Barkley. maybe what he offers in terms of a take no prisoners approach between the tackles is more, because that's not what Barkley is not going to be a Leonard Fournette type. I mean, Barkley's not going to give your offense an identity of like, we're a battering ram, we're going to step on your face. I mean, that's why I find him an interesting fit in Indy. Whereas I think that Chubb gives you that, and Chubb has shown some of that long speed already. I love the idea of Chubb, say in Detroit, where that's exactly what they need. That's the identity their running game needs. There's a lot of teams, even a team like Miami pairing him with, because you see the pairing, it's New Orleans, it's the Georgia Bulldogs, the way you can make two running backs feature backs in your offense. And I think that Chubb gives you that between the tackles presence that some teams are looking for. Where Sony Michel, now Cease, you can tell me what you think of this comparison. When I watch Sony Michel, I see Detroit Lions Reggie Bush, not Reggie Bush earlier in his career whenever he was still trying to take things outside, when he was more of a receiving weapon. Remember, Reggie Bush's last go-round with Detroit, he was a hard-nosed runner inside, but still elusive, still an excellent receiver, and a true bell cow type of back. And I think Michel could be that, but I think the Alvin Kamara model has also shown teams how you can use two backs. It's not tipping your hand, depending on which backs out on the field. And Pat Shurmur, speaking of the Giants, has shown in the Vikings offense how you can use both backs at the same time and still harness all those talents. They're both tremendous. Sony Michel's not Alvin Kamara, though.
I think he might be LaShawn McCoy.
Sure. You like the Sony shake. Yeah, and that's the thing, is like short area quicks combined with surprising power. And look, Sony Michel measured in at about, 5'11", 215. He's not he's a substantial back physically.
This isn't Ron Jones.
Right. And Ron Jones measures the same as Clinton Portis, okay?
Ron Jones is Jamal Charles.
Jamal Charles, and almost exactly the same as Jamal Charles. And I see that too.
I talked to Rojo at the Super Bowl. His agent's Lee Steinberg. So I talked to Rojo on the air at the Super Bowl, and he loves the Charles comparison. That's who he patterns this game after, but it's a different style. Sony Michel, people have mislabeled him as like, oh, that's a change of pace back just because of that quickness and speed. I believe he could be a lead back in the mold of LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that there. So that's 5. We barely touched on Geis, which is, I like your restraint you're showing there is your LSU. Well, and let's not talk about Darius Geis. Let's talk about Darrell Williams. Let's talk about the guy behind the guy behind the guy.
Darrell Williams was at the Senior Bowl. I know we haven't done our Senior Bowl show yet, Bloom, but he wasn't as impressive as perhaps he could have been. Certainly there in Mobile, where guys like Rashad Penny, who, by the way, didn't do much on the bench press today. I'm not going to hold that against him necessarily. Like him, some larger backs, Rashad Penny, Ryan Nall, the wrecking Nall, the Oregon State Beaver, didn't do a lot on the bench press today. So an interesting day nonetheless here in Indy, Bloom.
Yeah, and it's going to especially get interesting starting tomorrow when the workouts start. But the measurement, we've had a lot from the measurements to talk about. I think probably from a fantasy standpoint, one of the biggest ones that you go back to the drawing board, or do you go back to the drawing board, is DJ Moore measuring at 6 feet. That dude didn't look 6 feet on film, but he's, we trust those measurements. We saw some interesting stuff. Calvin Ridley measuring in in the 180s. Kind of a slender wide receiver, already one who doesn't have a lot of physicality or edge to his game, whether it's contested balls or breaking tackles after the catch and things like that. So that, I think that he'll still go in the first round, but physically you see the limitations. And some of these things we already knew about players, but then you see the measurables in terms of height, weight, arm length, hand size, and it really confirms what we believe we observed. One of the other things I thought was really interesting while we're talking running backs is Nyheim Hines out of NC State, coming in at 5'8" and 3/8, 5'8.5", basically 198. Look, 5'8", 198. Again, this is not I was saying Chris Thompson. I think you can use him as a Chris Thompson role kind of back, but that's not an insubstantial back for. He measured in. So I was looking through historical combine data and coming up with height weights that were close to give people an idea. And one of the players close to Nyheim Hines, Ray Rice.
There you go. It happens here in Indy at the Scouting Combine, where I am at with this beautiful red curtain at the La Quinta, Sigma Bloom in Austin, Texas this
Kind
week.
of a Twin Peaks feel, Cecil.
As the Audible Live returns this week. I'll be back out there getting some cold pops after this show, but the information is certainly flowing, Bloom. Having dinner with some scouts last night, NFL evaluators, and one told me, forget Jay Cutler not having any friends in Chicago. Josh Rosen doesn't have any friends in the state of California. Now, two of his offensive linemen talked to us media types today at the convention center in Indy. Colton Miller and Scott Kessenberry both said, I don't know where this stuff's coming from. He's a great teammate, great leader. I talked to John Elway yesterday. I know that the Broncos like Josh Rosen. They also like Baker Mayfield. Their infatuation perhaps with Josh Allen is fading. Keep that in your mental register. But this Josh Rosen thing, for me, the attitude, like the guy's super confident. I was talking to a scout in Tampa in the Shrine game who actually brought up the hot tub, like as a negative, Bloom. I was like, inflatable hot tub in your dorm room, that guy's a player now. That's what we all, would think that we could do back in the day in our own dorm room. So that part of his attitude doesn't bother me as much. I know that a couple of years ago, he was told by his coaches, like, hey, you're not real popular. You should probably work on that. And he did. And then we've got Miller, we've got Kessenberry talking about Josh Rosen today. The ego, right? You see him maybe go to the Giants, spending a year behind Eli, something that could humble him or kind of teach him the way. The largest thing that I'm concerned with Josh Rosen is the medical checks that are going to be done here at the Combine. How's that shoulder? And then two, something that I heard in Tampa that we'll talk about now is that Josh Rosen is concerned about his brand. How much does he love football? All that age-old question. But when I heard the word brand, like, oh, he's concerned about his brand. I don't necessarily like that, Bloom. Maybe that's the old school in me. But with Josh Rosen, the talent, and I believe, we haven't talked about this yet, Bloom, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there is no doubt the prettiest passer in this draft class, the guy that's plug and play. I don't believe there's such a thing as pro ready. But with Josh Rosen, mechanically, he's there. So many questions with Darnold. We're going to get to the hand size with Darnold today. We're going to get to his fumbles and all that accuracy issues with Josh Allen, etc. But for me, Josh Rosen is that top quarterback. He is the best pure passer in this draft. Question about medical, question about attitude. Where do you weigh in on this? And by the way, when I asked Elway, knowing that they like him, he lit up like a Christmas tree and told me they are bringing Josh Rosen to Dove Valley for one of the 30 pre-draft visits. But anyway, let's discuss Rosen and how this interview process coming up tomorrow, very important for Rosen.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I mean, he's smart enough to understand that. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to back down from being the person he is. And I think that he's smart enough. We are really looking at a new. I mean, Josh Rosen is woke. You think that's fair, Cease?
Yeah,
he's woke, and he's not going to back down from being woke. He's not going to say, okay, I'm going to be a yes man and a company guy now that I'm going to the NFL. And I don't believe he's going to pretend that he's a different person now, and he gets it, or he's more mature. But I don't know if it's a question of maturity. When you even talk about his brand, is that, and I understand what you say, and I agree that like old school NFL will bristle at that. Maybe Josh Rosen is the guy we see have a draft day fall, because in these interviews, he's not going to renounce his old self. He's not going to renounce some of the things he said. Let's say this, Cease, right? Like of the first round draft picks, he's one of the one or two most likely to have a political message in his speech. He's not going to stick to football. He's never stuck to football, and he's not going to. But if that causes him to fall into the teens or 20s, but it's to an organization that wants him knowing that, isn't that better for his career long term?
Not going to happen. He's not going to fall past 5. He's not going to fall past the Broncos. But I get what you're saying, and I want to bring up that political part of the conversation. We generally stay away from most of that on this show, but it is part of the Josh Rosen conversation. He's on Trump's golf course wearing an F Trump hat, right? That's who that guy is. And for all the people speculating like he couldn't get along with Elway, I've talked to Broncos officials. That's not going to happen. That's not a concern. And if you, to take people behind the scenes, Bloom, if you were in an NFL locker room, you see so many different religious backgrounds, you see so many different political backgrounds, you see so many different social backgrounds, all these different things, and it's just family, right? So Josh Rosen is going to be
committed,
outspoken.
if
Yes,
you're committed, and I
gotta
think
love
he is.
football, gotta be part of the team, and I believe Rosen is as well.
Yeah.
But for people, the narrative, I think the hot radio take is like, oh, Josh Rosen, he's political, blah. NFL doesn't care. Can you play?
Well,
and that locker room doesn't care. And the front office, by the way, at least in Denver, from what I've told, doesn't care either.
Yeah, and look, and this is the thing, right? And just the way you say reflexively, he's not going to get past 5, shows you how compelling his talent is. And you talk about pretty. If we're talking about any quarterback, that there are things that are pretty. As a passer, as a classic pocket passer, and one of the other variables here is how important to your offense is the classic pocket passer skills. Because on the other hand, you have a Lamar Jackson, and if you have a offensive coordinator who says, "Tell me what I've got, and I'll design around that." Well, maybe Lamar Jackson is the top prospect in this class, because if you can successfully leverage his amazing athleticism, like then you have something that defenses are going to struggle preparing for compared to every other quarterback in the league. But Rosen, as a drop back passer, as a pocket passer, is ideal. But I want to just to circle back to this idea of his personality. I had Eric Galco on the couch last week, and he brings up, and it isn't whether you think you'd want Rosen on your team or not. It is that teams know, as I like to say, teams take on the personality of their quarterback and their head coach, and he's going to represent the team. And if a team isn't comfortable with him, then they're not going to become more comfortable with him after they take him. And Tom Pelissero, NFL.com, wrote a tremendous article about the
friend
question.
Of the show.
Yeah, friend of the show's back when he was a Packers beat writer.
Yes.
And he said, and isn't it great to see Mike Garafolo breaking big scoops too? By the way, the first to appear on the 5-minute drill. Anyway, what he got about Rosen from an NFC executive says the biggest hole in his makeup is, can he endear himself to his teammates? And I think that was a challenge for him at UCLA when he had, let's just say, this was really funny, Cease, when he had, let's just say, less intelligent receivers or a less intelligent group of quarterbacks. He made them feel like doo-doo. And an AFC scout said he wasn't easy to coach. He said he never thought that those guys, coaches, were doing for him. He always thought that he was doing something for them. He's blunt. He can come across as a know-it-all. Jay Cutler, Jeff George, are brought up. But the party antics abated. He worked harder. He was the leader of the offense. Teammates competed for him. And some of his teammates liked that he was controversial and took a stand. And I think in an NFL locker room, he's probably more likely to have everyone rally around him than he is to alienate people because of the person that he is. And an NFC scout said that what's out there about him is overblown. He enjoyed the nightlife a little bit. And they like you have expressed, like, the hot tub, because he has something to say about the NCAA exploiting college athletes.
Right.
And he did say old school evaluators will say, forget him. But some people are going to be like, hey, he was a 3.5 econ major at UCLA. He's thinking beyond football. He's thinking that he wants to be a mogul, so he's going to do what's necessary. And, that's in some ways at his age showing advanced thinking, that's a good thing. And I do think that Rosen is going to be a quarterback that is probably the safest quarterback in this class. And the things that are not safe about him, you mentioned the medical things, and obviously that's something they're going to look at. But what's not safe about him is more from a perception standpoint. And hey, perception can matter, as it did in this Marcus Peters situation that just went down, or possibly did. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, especially with a team like the Giants with Mr. Old School Dave Gettleman, and you got Mr. Old School John Dorsey. So maybe he will fall to number 5.
Yeah, we shall see. Let's talk about Sam Darnold. The hand measurement comes in, Bloom, larger than people thought. Now, Jared Goff a couple of years ago, so pissed off at the podium when he was talking about his 9-inch hands. Like, it really bothered him, and that was a bad look at the podium. Jared Goff had a pretty good look this year, and people will forget about that small hands talk. But that's what was expected with Sam Darnold, and we didn't get that. So then it kind of highlights, okay, well, you can kind of explain the 35 turnovers in 2 years, and majority of 21 of those being fumbles, whatever the number is. All right, now he doesn't have small hands. So for me, with Darnold, and what scares me about Darnold, he's a first-round quarterback. We all know that. And he's got shades of Ben Roethlisberger to his game. Josh Rosen, to me, Bloom is Matt Ryan, and maybe a little bit of Eli Manning, hence the Giants connection. But with Sam Darnold, I see a little shades of Ben Roethlisberger. I'm concerned not only about the turnovers. He takes some chances with the ball. I'm not against that. But for me, mechanically, it seems like his shoulders and his head and his feet and his hips don't always match. So he'll see something coming. He'll see something developing. He won't change his feet first. He'll just turn his shoulders and throw. And then the pass will be off, and the off-target passes are there with Sam Darnold. So let's go through the information that came out today about Sam Darnold and go through also the fact that he's not throwing at the combine.
Yeah, which the quarterbacks who haven't thrown, it's not a great list to be on. But I understand wanting to.
Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not. It's not saying it's a death knell for him or anything like that. But I understand. It's a money question. It's a business. I understand wanting to have your throwing for teams, at least publicly, in a controlled environment. And the hand size is good because there's one knock, just really basic scouting, the kind of scouting that anybody listening to the show right now or watching the show could do, is he just doesn't take care of the ball. He has not taken care of the ball, and that includes those 21 fumbles over the last 2 years. And hand size, when you fumble that much, is something they're going to look at. So that was one of Tom Pelissero's questions. Another one is about his personality. And this just shows you, Cease, during the draft season, it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Baker Mayfield is too brash, and Josh Rosen is too outspoken and arrogant. Sam Darnold, well, they say he's not a real dynamic dude. An NFL executive said he's kind of a flatliner. He's got some fire, but it's more internal fire. There's no issue, but can he step in and command the locker room? Who's this 20-year-old baby-faced kid? But the other interesting question about Darnold that Tom Pelissero said, and look, we can look at these things and we say these are valid or not valid, but I think that Pelissero has his finger on the pulse of what the NFL is thinking. And that in and of itself is revealing about the prospect, but also revealing about how the NFL approaches this. But they're asking, how much football does he know? The college scouting director said the board and his knowledge is going to be important to test because he's got strides to make there. He's almost more of a street ball player than a classic quarterback. And this goes what you're talking about, the funky, elongated throwing motion, head scratching moments, boneheaded throws and decision making. And there's potentially, an AFC scout said, some football intelligence questions. But an NFC scout pointed out that they didn't have a lot of weapons in the passing game. Maybe Deontay Burnett in this class. I think Stephen Mitchell too. Some offensive line problems, which speaks well to Ronald Jones, by the way, if, the offensive line issues, what he was able to do. So I think with Darnold, you really have to answer the questions about the turnovers. And it brings to mind Jameis Winston. It just brings to mind an idea of, again, going back to the decision-making. And I think that does mean that, we think of Darnold and Rosen, I think, is the more safe quarterbacks. And when we get to Baker Mayfield, what I have to say might surprise you. I don't know. I'm looking forward to digging in more on each of these guys. But I think that with Darnold, all the traits are there and the upside is there. And it could be a rocky ride at some times, but at some of those mechanical things that you point out, Cease, are downstream from thinking. And I think you want to set him up to be more to be executing in a tighter way and be executing a little bit more in structure. Exactly. And that's something that Baker Mayfield does. And that's something where that's where Baker Mayfield can shine compared to the other quarterbacks.
Yeah. And Baker Mayfield can go through progressions quickly, and he does a good job of using his eyes to manipulate the defense. Yeah. He uses RPO and spread concepts to get a lot of wide open looks. One of my concerns with Baker Mayfield is that he's throwing to wide open guys a lot. So, where's that pass placement? But we've seen him move his eyes. We've seen him throw accurately from within the pocket and on the run. He's not as athletic as Russell Wilson. and he's not Drew Brees, but there's enough accuracy there to be plenty productive as a starter. There's plenty of heart there as well, and just knowing. Talking to Baker at the Senior Bowl, and this was away from the podium. This was in a private moment. I know his agent is the agent of my co-host in Denver, Mike Pritchard. So got to hang out with Jack Mills, got to hang out with Baker Mayfield, talking about the importance of family. He was with his mother in the hospital, and that's why he was late to the Senior Bowl. And both of us, Bloom, in a personal moment, both of us have lost our mothers. So we can really appreciate a guy who drops everything and is late to the Senior Bowl because he wants to be in his hospital with his mom. So really kind of appreciating and getting to know Baker Mayfield on that point of view. I think the brashness, the boldness, the on-field, the crotch grabbing, the planting the flag, even though it's in artificial turf and won't actually plant, getting tackled by the police, maybe doesn't get a lot of street cred for that one, not being able to run away from the cops. But the things with Baker Mayfield, to me, are completely overblown in terms of the off-field issues. And again, just because you talk to a guy doesn't mean you know him, but just being around him, being around his mannerisms, being around his family, talk to his brother, learning things from his agent, learning things about his family. This is a driven person, a driven player. Obviously, Bloom, he walked on twice and won a Heisman. So the accuracy I like, the ability to use his eyes to manipulate the defense I like, pass placement I'd like to see a little bit better, and he's not quite as athletic as you may think. Plus, and this is a conversation going around the combine here in Indy, is the traditional drop back passer a thing of the past? When I was talking to Elway, this was away from the interview process, but I was talking to John Elway. He was talking about Lamar Jackson, who is a quarterback, by the way. We're going to get to that. But he also said one thing. He said, the game is going that way. You have to be ahead of it. So for all this, you got to set up things up for Baker Mayfield and RPO. Yeah. You should be doing that anyway with many of these quarterbacks. And Baker Mayfield will be at the top of that list.
Yeah, what's interesting about Mayfield to me is of the quarterbacks I've watched in this class, he was a bit underwhelming. I'm not going to lie.
Tell us why.
I don't think he naturally senses pressure. I don't see him detecting pressure in his peripheral vision. And I don't see him, once he does detect pressure, loading up any kind of escapability. This is where the Russell Wilson comparisons fall apart in addition to athleticism. He doesn't sense and escape pressure in the pocket. I saw more than one sequence where he was sacked on consecutive plays, and sometimes he would actually scramble or escape right into the pressure. And the other thing that I saw was that intermediate and deep accuracy. Look, I get it. Lots and lots of stats, lots and lots of analytics even point to Baker Mayfield as a very productive quarterback. But was that production created by the scheme and play design and teammates, or created by Mayfield? And when you watch a Baker Mayfield game, you will see a lot of short completions, a lot of, and look, to his credit, he throws the ball on short little flares and screens and slants to set up run after catch opportunities. He does very well with that. But the farther downfield the throw, the dicier the accuracy. I think that he's more of an Andy Dalton type. We've seen Andy Dalton flourish in scenarios and schemes in where he had a good offensive line and good players around him, and he executed the plays very well. Do I think Baker Mayfield can add value? I don't know. I see him. I think he's more comfortable outside of the pocket than inside of the pocket. I think a lot of the plays that he made outside of structure, a big assist has to go to that offensive line. Some of his plays outside of structure, he had more time than he's ever going to get in the NFL. So I think that he is a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, but without Lamar Jackson's upside, that you have to scheme around his strengths and weaknesses. And that's not a quarterback I'm going to take in the top 5. That's not a quarterback that I'm going to build my offense around, that's a quarterback that I'm going to plug into my offense, knowing that any competent quarterback could probably get, like, look at what Case Keenum did with Minnesota this year. I think Case Keenum is maybe not a floor for Baker Mayfield, like the third floor or the fifth floor. He's not the ceiling, he's not the penthouse either. But I don't necessarily I see a player with flaws. I see a player with flaws that are going to become more glaring and apparent in the NFL. And I see a player that is going to be able to set up his more talented teammates to succeed, but not elevate his offense.
All Georgia did was go from zone to man, and it was over.
Right.
Now that's one game and one half of one game, but a very important game. We know that Baker Mayfield played in a ton of big games, so that conversation will continue, and it'll be something very interesting to watch to see how he develops in his game with that limited tool set. And one thing, I guess we'll debate this now quickly, Bloom, because we got to get to Allen and Jackson, but not feeling pressure. It brings up the old Joe Flacco debate, because cool Joe Flacco, the reason why he's cool under pressure is because he doesn't see it and he doesn't feel it. Now, Flacco's a little bit more athletic and larger, obviously, than Baker Mayfield. But, and I agree with you that when he does sense that escapability, it's often too late. He'll try to escape out of the side of the pocket and he'll get tackled from a defensive lineman who's already crashed in on him. So you have to have a better anticipation of that pressure. But sometimes, in the case of a Joe Flacco or a Baker Mayfield, is that necessarily not a bad thing to not be skittish? Because he's certainly not that. He's not skittish. He doesn't see ghosts. He just doesn't see the ghost soon enough. What can we call that? Like, doesn't see the bus before it runs.
Yeah, he doesn't see ghosts, but he doesn't see like the axe murderer coming in the window either.
He's the guy that's having sex in Friday the 13th. And it's like, dude, you should know better.
Yeah,
come on, Baker Mayfield.
Right. We know how this scene ends, though. What happens to that guy when they start the scene out? Yeah. No, look, I just think it means he needs a good offensive line. I mean, look what happened to Andy Dalton this year. I just think it means that he's going to be like a frog. Very sensitive to the environment around him. He's not going to be Andrew Luck. And that's not, he's not going to be Andrew Luck. But what I mean is I'm using Andrew Luck as an example of a quarterback that, of the quarterbacks in this class, maybe Josh Allen, actually, because that's kind of the situation he was in at Wyoming, or Lamar Jackson can, like, in a Colin Kaepernick kind of way, can create even if the surroundings are not ideal. I think Baker Mayfield needs ideal surroundings. One last thing on Baker Mayfield, and this comes back to what you were saying about Georgia switching from zone to man and how all of a sudden the door closed. One thing about Baker Mayfield's tape also that, and this is one of those things, and Matt Waldman will be here. He's part of the crew. But Matt Waldman is a maestro at understanding how when you evaluate a player's college tape, you're watching just what on face value, but with an eye towards, let's take what we're observing and then put it in the context of what happens in NFL games. The competition gets better. It speeds up. Things that you can get away with in college, you can't get away with in the pros. These, like, parts of your game that are maybe not as important in college become magnified in the pros, and parts of your game that, like, where's your success coming from? This is why the why of success. Something that you rarely, if ever, see on a Baker Mayfield game tape is an anticipation throw. It's a throw where he's throwing to a receiver before they make the break in the route. And
he's throwing to wide open guys all day.
He's throwing to the guy. He's not he leads players in a subtle way for run after catch opportunities, but he's not like in the NFL. Passing is more about these vectors where you're processing and you're throwing to the spot in the action so much faster that you're having to make anticipation throws. He does make some throws over the middle where he can drop the ball over. We've talked about windows and skylights. Like, he can, but sometimes he also can overthrow the ball by 5 yards on those same throws and throw interception. But anticipation throws and the idea that switching to man coverage really flustered him tells me that he's going to have to evolve in the NFL and be able to not throw to what he sees, but throw to what he knows is going to be there in a second. And that's not something you see on his tape at Oklahoma.
Josh Allen is a big, strapping young man, and he's got the big hands. He's got the big arm. What the hell is he doing throwing from his knees and hitting the crossbar like Kyle Bowler, who we've seen this before? And speaking of Joe Flacco or Kyle Bowler, Bloom, that's who I most closely compare Josh Allen's game to. He's not Ben Roethlisberger, in my opinion. Plus, the accuracy issues that historically do not get better. And this isn't a Jake Locker situation. I having a couple of pops with Aaron Schatz last night for Football Outsiders, and we went back and forth a little bit. I love Aaron; he's a dear friend, but we went back and forth a little bit because he was saying, "No, Jake Locker, that's who Josh Allen is." I was like, "No. Jake Locker was perfect mechanically, and still was a 55% passer. Josh Allen is a 56% passer, and historically that doesn't get better." And there's not like these mechanical flaws like there are with Darnold, where you can just be like, "Oh my God, there's so much to fix." There's not really that much with Josh Allen. He can throw with touch. He does throw with heat way too often. And for me, instead of the video hitting the crossbar from 50 yards on his knees, which is just stupid, just don't do it. The video you need to watch was put out by Nikki Javala from the Denver Post, where he's 10 yards away. I was in the press box doing a show when he made this throw 10 yards away to one of those big old passing nets, Bloom, right? And he missed the net entirely. That's the video that's more important than the stupid hitting the crossbars from the knees thing. So, and there's one quarterback, and my man Mike Pritchard always brings this up to stick it to me a little bit, but there's one quarterback who went from incredibly poor accuracy in college, 54% I think the number was for Brett Favre, to being that 62% pass or whatever it was at the NFL. I don't think Josh Allen's Brett Favre. And I don't think – I think the history and the data shows with Allen, who I'd love to say Wyoming Cowboys, baby. I'd love to have Josh Allen work out as a pro. He's clearly a first-round quarterback. But that accuracy is scary, and that accuracy is something that cannot and usually does not get fixed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's really fair. I think the term I've heard is layups. He just doesn't make the layups. And that's a problem. I mean, that's something that, as you said, it's not something you develop at the pro level. It's just like when we'll talk wide receivers eventually, like ball skills. You either make a nice, true play on the ball in the air or you don't. And when the game speeds up in the NFL and you're facing better cornerbacks, it isn't like it becomes easier, So if you're not making the layups in college, it's unlikely you're going to make them in the pros. And there's just that subtlety missing to his game. But you understand the NFL fascination because coaches are going to be believing in themselves to say, well, we can take this perfect arm strength and build and athleticism that we can build around, and we can fix everything else. So it's going to say a lot about the organization that decides to take Josh Allen. But as you alluded to, Denver, other teams in the top 5, probably cooling on him. It's going to be really interesting to see if Cleveland takes him with John Dorsey calling the shots again. The old school idea, or maybe the Giants. Although I think Rosen and the Giants is an interesting combination. But which team decides to take Josh Allen and those prodigious tools? But I agree with you that the kinds of flaws he shows. There's those ooh ah kind of plays, but maybe is he Blake Bortles? Maybe is he a quarterback you protect with an offense that is more run heavy, and you ask him to make only a certain number of throws a game, and maybe ask him to pull a rabbit out of the hat, on a few plays, but not build around him. But if we're having this kind of conversation, even though Blake Bortles went pretty high, that's not a quarterback you're going to take in the top 5.
Yeah, we'll see where Josh Allen goes in this conversation. There's 5 first-round quarterbacks. There's 8 that are really worth a damn, in my opinion, and we'll get to those throughout the show as we lead up to the pre-draft. Of course, we're back on Thursday nights here, and Matt Waldman, Dr. Gene Bramwell, they'll both be joining us as we hit through this pre-draft process. I'm live in Indianapolis, Bloom, where I saw Bill Polian. Didn't talk to Bill Polian. He was walking with Adam Schefter, said what's up to Adam. But the Polian comments on Lamar Jackson are very odd to me because, throw him in a wide receiver right away, all those sorts of things. He's a quarterback. And I like what Andy Reid, the guy who's known to take quarterbacks and do unique things with them. Andy Reid was joking around yesterday at the press conference. And he was like, how about you just let him do what he naturally does? How about you give him a shot doing that, because that's what he does best. And here's the thing. Does he have the athleticism to play wide receiver? Of course, but he's also sneaky in the pocket, better than people would consider. Now the accuracy, leaving his feet to throw sometimes very, very bad. So mechanically poor, and issues to clean up, but from the pocket, throwing with anticipation. This is something that Lamar Jackson does better than people think. They'll look at the raw data. They'll look at the completion percentage and be like, this guy can't throw. He's inaccurate. And I just got done talking about Josh Allen and those inaccuracy issues. And also another thing we need to bring up is no one ever talks about Josh Allen converting to tight end. Josh Allen needs to convert to tight end right away because he is inaccurate. Well, Lamar Jackson doesn't need to play wide receiver. He needs to play quarterback. He's a right-handed Michael Vick. And he's a player that if you're creative, you can get a lot out of, and bloom, you could get more out of than some people think.
Oh, you could. Oh, you get so much. Okay, there's some questions about why his mom is his agent. I don't know. My mom would probably.
She's an advisor. It will. And
okay,
maybe to being an agent. Rich and I talked about that today, and I don't really like that. And maybe it's the LeVar Ball thing,
right.
It becomes too personal. You need that buffer. Like when Russell Okung wasn't his own agent, the Broncos can just go to him and be like, man, you suck. We're going to get you a pay cut or whatever. Like you need that buffer. And, as a parent of an athlete, a couple athletes, when they struggle and people are around you and saying things about them, it takes everything in your power not to want to rip people's heads off if they're having a bad game. I remember some guy, and he didn't know I was Liam's dad, and it was somebody from the other school we were playing, and Liam was having a bad game at quarterback. And this guy was just like ripping, that quarterback, look at that pass, that guy sucks. And it took every fiber in my being not to just tear this guy apart. But that's the personal side. And that's why with the moms, we all respect the moms, right? We all love the moms. It's something where, in this case, in the professional manner, the Annie Apple thing certainly didn't work out. When you have Snacks Harrison chasing around Eli Apple in the locker room to tear his head off, I mean, these things aren't working. The LeVar Ball thing, that's not working. The helicopter parent thing, it's a little bit out of control. So we can respect Lamar Jackson, certainly respect his mother, and love all mothers. That's for sure. It's part of the decision-making process that I wish he would have done differently and just gotten regular representation.
Yeah, and that's a question I think he's going to have to answer a lot now. But any offensive coordinator worth his salt is going to be able to make a lot out of Lamar Jackson. And he can go through progressions in the pocket, and he can throw with accuracy. And I mean, I saw some similar scattershot accuracy issues from Deshaun Watson at Clemson. Not to the extent that you see it from Lamar Jackson. Jackson throws a little bit of a narrow base that can sometimes lead to some accuracy issues, but you tolerate that because unlike Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson's coming into the league at a time when there's a lot more college concepts in offense. There's a lot more spread, a lot more offensive minds with NFL coaching positions that will design an offense and plays that are embracing what he brings to offer. And as you said, it's not crazy to say he's the right-handed Michael Vick. He doesn't have Michael Vick's natural arm talent. I mean, look, if we're talking about natural arm talent, Michael Vick is one of the all-timers. But he has athleticism to be in the vicinity of Michael Vick. So did Reggie McNeil, to be fair. But Lamar Jackson is light years ahead of anything that Reggie McNeil showed at Texas A&M. And I want to submit here this idea that you're exposing your quarterback to injury. I don't think it's true. I think that, and also I think that the pressure, the stress of having to defend what's Lamar Jackson going to run? 4-4, maybe 4-4-5. I mean, one of the reasons that people like Bill Polian, and it is off base, say moving to wide receiver, is he's got the size, athleticism, speed to be an NFL wide receiver. But what that means is to defend him, takes a different approach than any other quarterback in the NFL. And whether you use that to create binds that open things up in the passing game, or you use that to have potential chunk plays with him as a runner, or otherwise you just force the defense to devote more attention and energy to containing his running ability, that's going to give you tactical advantages and as an offensive coordinator. And Dylan DeSimone did some good stuff around Kaepernick, and I think there's been a few other studies that show that intuitively, when is a quarterback most likely to get hurt? Is it when he's a runner or when he's a passer? And yes, guys can load up and take hits on him when he's a runner, but as a runner, you get to dictate some part of the terms of that engagement. You get to protect yourself. You get to go down sometimes, slide, what have you. As a pocket passer, you're taking hits in the middle of your throwing motion. You're taking combination hits. A guy's hitting you high and hitting you low. You're trying to concentrate on your mechanics, stepping into your throw, and there's all kinds of trash around you. Bodies flying around you, sometimes your own guys. You're not in control of what's happening around you. Every time you drop your quarterback back to pass, you're risking injury. So what's the argument here of not having Lamar Jackson and leveraging his running because of their injury risk? And he measured in, 6 pounds lighter than Sam Darnold? He's not a beanpole back there,
Yeah, he's not 205. He was 216, and that's a huge because I always add 10 pounds. So he's probably in an NFL weight room. Let's say he's just going to be 220-ish. It's plenty big.
Yeah, he's not going to be somebody that is overwhelmed by the NFL game physically. So I would be very excited if my team drafted Lamar Jackson. Hint, Pittsburgh, you did it with Cordell Stewart, because that's the other thing. And this isn't insignificant. Like, say you're Jacksonville. I love the idea of Jacksonville taking Lamar Jackson because Bortles' contract is really just 1 year. Oh, you'd have to eat $6.5 million if you cut him next year. In the meantime, you can use Lamar Jackson on some plays on a Cordell Stewart kind of package this year, plays that can swing games. And even if you just do it sometimes so that going into Sunday, a defensive coordinator has to spend a lot of time saying, if we see this look, these are the things we have to be aware of, or you force them to call a timeout. Maybe on a fourth down, you send Lamar Jackson out there and split him out, or you even do something. And look, the NFL should be more open to unorthodox things like here. Like, what if you have Blake Bortles and Lamar Jackson back there, and then the defense doesn't know who they're going to snap the ball to, or who knows? My point is, there's tactical value to Lamar Jackson, and one of the things that people agree on is you need a year. Like, of all the quarterbacks in this class, you want to give Lamar Jackson a year. Well, during that year, he can still have tactical value and help you win games.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this draft shakes out with 5 first-round quarterbacks, and I think Jackson. 15 Arizona? I see 4 of those going near the top 10, if not completely in the top 10. Then you have Baltimore, who wants a quarterback. You have the Chargers, who want a quarterback. You have the Bills, who really want a quarterback and are going to dangle both of those first rounders, 21 and 22. I know the Saints want Kyle Lauletta in the second round. So everyone keep the mental notes about that. And Lauletta had a very good Senior Bowl, measuring well here at the Combine. But really, there's 18 quarterbacks here at the Combine, Bloom. Really, only 8 of them are interesting to me. I'm not a big Mason Rudolph guy. He was never blitzed at Oklahoma State, and he played in a conference that we don't normally associate with
7-on-7 drills.
Right, making good quarterback plays, which we need to also remember with Baker Mayfield, it's the same damn conference. But point is this, we're here for you. We're here to discuss things, what's going on throughout the NFL draft world. We didn't even get to regular NFL news tonight, Bloom. But I got a little radio spot coming up here in Denver, so I'll jump on the radio. And then, of course, the show coming up tomorrow, the show every week. We've got On the Couch back as well. We'll get in some more specialty shows that we haven't got to yet this offseason, but we are back, Bloom, and it feels great to be talking football and NFL draft with you, brother.
Yeah, it's great to be talking to you too, and I'm glad you're holding it down for all of us in Indy and for everybody out there. It's a great joy. I know that our love of the draft was what brought us together, and really was truly the genesis of the Audible. It was a draft show, And it's so immensely fascinating at all the different layers, all the different ways it implicates football philosophy, and that have an audience that has always appreciated that and encouraged us and engaged in that with us has been a joy and a privilege, and that we're still going and adding new people to the fold and getting to know everybody better. It is a real privilege, and this is going to be a fun one.
It is the Audible Live, and yes, I've gotten requests here in Indy Bloom to put the show on the road. So maybe a Denver show. We could do a live Denver show. We could do a live Austin show. Maybe something like maybe a live Atlanta show. Go out and see Matt. But yeah, we've definitely heard about that. It's something we would consider. Our man Matt Miller does his podcast live sometimes, so we'll definitely be putting our ear to the ground, seeing what we could do for you. Of course, here for you every week. Here on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom, at Cecil Lammy. Follow Matt Waldman. Get the RSP. I mean, my God, rookie scouting portfolio. MattWaldmanRSP.com. Dr. Gene Bramble will be back in the fold as well. And at the Audible on Twitter. And, of course, subscribe to us on iTunes. We appreciate everyone for doing that. So, for the great Sigmund Bloom, I'm Cecil Lammy saying, I think you can see the stack of comic books I bought a little bit earlier today at Downtown Comics in Indy. It's a great comic book store. But anyway, love you guys. Appreciate you. Stay tuned and stay frosty.